Hello Twitter, welcome to my top 15 games of 2019. This is a Twitter list that I'm probably going to upload to YouTube afterwards. I haven't really done anything like this before, so this is a good way to test this out to see whether or not I like this format. If I do, I'll probably start doing videos on YouTube like this. Anyway, these are just picks that I like, personally. Most people are probably going to disagree with me, because everybody has their own opinions on video games. With that being said, let's get into the honorable mentions. Games that I thought were pretty good, but not necessarily as good as the rest of the list. Either that, or they're games that I didn't play this year, because I just didn't get around to them. But they are pretty significant, so I feel like they should be mentioned. First up is Pathologic 2, which is a survival game that is utter pain and agony to play, but I enjoyed every moment of it, even when I wasn't. Then we have Dragon Quest Builders 2, which pretty much is everything I wanted from a sequel from Dragon Quest Builders, and it does a pretty good job at being a story-driven block building game. Super Mario Maker 2 was an inevitability, but I'm still glad that it came out. It's very fun to make levels, and all of the new mechanics that they added are really great. I didn't get around to playing Sekiro, but it did win Game of the Year, but I haven't really played it, so I can't really say much about it right now. But I do want to give it an honorable mention because many people have said it was pretty good. Code Vein is the best $60 character creator I ever bought. It's not the best game, but it is a really good character creator. Take the TV show Firefly and mix it with Fallout New Vegas, and that's pretty much Outer Worlds. I haven't gotten too far into it, but it's left a pretty good impression on me. It's pretty much what I wanted from another Obsidian game. I didn't play Kingdom Hearts 3. A bunch of people were telling me that I should have played it, but I just never got around to it. But it is a game that has been in development for an unreasonably long amount of time, so I feel like the fact that it came out deserves an honorable mention just from that. And I've heard some people say it's pretty good. Wily Beast and Weakest Creature. Wily Beast and Weakest Creature. Wily Beast and Weakest Creature. I'm trying to memorize this title. The new Toho game, Toho 17, Wily Beast and Weakest Creature, is a pretty good Toho game. Not only is it more Toho, which is always good, but it also brings back a lot of old mechanics that were missing from newer Toho games, and because of that makes it a much more enjoyable Toho game. On top of that, the new mechanics make the game super aggressive and a lot of fun to play. This was originally on my top 15 list, but then it actually got pushed out by other games. Bunworks is a pretty advanced physics VR action game. It's a game where I spent 2 hours moving a box only to realize that I was not actually doing the right thing, and I wasted 2 hours of my time trying to physics a box to get up to an area that I wasn't supposed to get to. Pretty good game. Those were the honorable mentions. I only said a few sentences on each so that I wouldn't be here too long. Now we're going to move on to the main entries. Number 15 is Demon's Tilt, which is a pinball bullet hell game. It's more focused on pinball though. It's heavily inspired by Genesis games and other types of video pinball games, and it has a bit of a mystical aesthetic to it. It's a very highly polished and addicting pinball game. If you like pinball, Demon's Tilt is a pretty good game to check out. Its demonic enemies and occult appearance give it a really unique charm to it. It's got a wealth of mechanics that usually involve A, trying to get the highest score, B, trying to kill all of the enemies, or C, trying to just hold on for your dear life and hoping you don't die quickly. Its music is Genesis/Mega Drive inspired, and it's got this really jammin' MIDI guitar that really gets you excited and hyped to play the game. The music escalating as you defeat the various bosses and get through their different phases makes the game feel a lot more than just a pinball game. It makes it feel like a fantasy action game. Coupled with all of the scorings and ranks that you get, it makes it almost feel like a Devil May Cry game at some points. If you're interested, you can pick up Demon's Tilt on the Steam Store or on Xbox Game Pass. It is also on PS4 and Switch. Number 14 is Resident Evil 2 Remake. When I first saw this game revealed, I was really excited because it was cool to see a Resident Evil 2 getting a remake, but then I was a little bit disappointed to see that it was going to have an over-the-shoulder camera angle instead of a fixed camera angle with pre-rendered backgrounds. But as I saw gameplay, it kind of grew on me. And especially after playing it, I can really appreciate the over-the-shoulder camera, really bringing new light to all of these environments. It really gave a new definition to Resident Evil 2, and I would be interested to see if they do something similar with Resident Evil 1, but I guess instead we're just going to get Resident Evil 3, but that's fine too. Personally, I'm pretty excited for the Resident Evil 3 remake. It's one of my favorites, actually. Resident Evil 2 Remake did a really good job at bringing the old game into a modern era. It really felt like a brand new game. Playing the old game and then comparing it to the new game is like playing two separately different games entirely. It really feels like a proper remake. And with that, you get to see tons of things that you never wanted to see in high definition, such as the lickers on the ceiling. You look up and you get... And then they took a part of Resident Evil 2 that was not at all threatening and made it the most threatening thing in the history of anything. I am, of course, talking about this big boy right here. That one right there, Mr. X. Yeah, that guy. He comes in my nightmares. Kind of hot though. Like, not gonna lie, kind of hot though. Seeing this game gives me a lot of hope for the future of Resident Evil, because previously we weren't really getting too many good Resident Evil games, but after Resident Evil 7, the series' future has looked a lot brighter. I hope Resident Evil 3's remake is just as good as this one. Number 13 is Killer Queen Black, which is a remake of an old arcade game that was exclusive to arcades. If you're unfamiliar with what Killer Queen is, it's an old game that was put in bars usually, because it was a pretty good way to get tons of customers to come in, and it made them a lot of money. It was a really good arcade attraction because it was a 4v4 team battle game, and it was really exciting in bars and arcades. Unfortunately, not everybody can go to a bar or arcade in this day and age, so it made sense to try and port it to a console. What does this filter do? Whoa, I look all glitchy. Killer Queen Black is a team-based strategy action game platformer. In the game, you either ride a snail to the finish point, collect berries, or kill the queen. It's a pretty weird game, and it's really fun. You need 8 people to play it. Right now it's a 4v4 game, but it's usually a 5v5 game in the arcade, but they couldn't do 5v5 on the Switch, so they just did 4v4 instead. It's a very hectic and chaotic multiplayer game. It's kind of hard to get set up because you need 8 people to play it, but once you get it all set up, it's such a blast to play with a ton of people. I used to play this a lot when it was an arcade machine, so I'm really glad to see it finally brought to the PC so that more people can experience this game, because there was pretty much no way to do it. The only way you could do it is by either going to an arcade or buying the arcade machine yourself, which is like $10,000, so I don't think that's really an option for a lot of people. It's a lot of fun and hard to explain. It's the kind of thing you need to play once and then you'll get the appeal of it. And it's a great couch co-op game. Number 12 on my list is Touhou Luna Nights, which is a Touhou Metroidvania fan game. In the game, you play a Sakuya who has the ability to stop time. But this time stop isn't actually just a gimmick. In most games with time stop mechanics, what will usually happen is they won't even stop time. They'll slow it down. And there won't really be much you can do there other than just, you do a few hits on them while they're stunned. Touhou Luna Nights, on the other hand, takes full advantage of the abilities of a time stop mechanic, and the entire game is built around it. Not only do you get to stop enemies, and when I say stop enemies, I mean they really stop, but on top of that, you also get the ability to throw knives and stop time, which then suspend in place and then move once you resume time. The best way you can describe this game is basically a Dio simulator. This is easily the best time stop mechanic I've ever seen in a video game. Most video games don't go the full mile and let you control everything on the stop time, whereas Touhou Luna Nights goes the full direction. And not only can you throw knives, but you can throw knives, then jump on them, use them as platforms. You can stop water in place so that you can then walk across it. You can stop bullets and then dash under them. And the entire game is a Metroidvania mixed with a bullet hell all at the same time. It is pretty dope. On top of being a really good Metroidvania, it's also just a very good Touhou game with a lot of fan service and a lot of character interactions that are super enjoyable. The main game is pretty good, and a lot of the time stop mechanics lead to some really fun puzzles, but the real place where the gameplay shines is the boss battles. The moment that I realized this game was awesome was the moment that I was fighting Marisa in the second stage boss, and I realized I had to slow down time and then dash under a moving laser beam. It's pretty rad. There's a lot of fun mechanics and a lot of really good progression throughout the game. I don't really need to say much more because if you aren't sold on the concept already, then you probably don't have an interest in the game. You can pick up Touhou Luna Nights on the Steam store. Number 11 is a game that has had a few controversies, but I personally really like. Pokemon Sword and Shield is a pretty good Pokemon game despite what a lot of people have said. Pokemon Sword and Shield is actually a pretty good Pokemon game in my opinion. It's the first time that I think in a long while that Pokemon has really felt like it got a huge jump in quality. It really feels like a proper next-gen Pokemon game. Pokemon Sword and Shield is pretty enjoyable all the way through, and it has a pretty entertaining plot, characters, and a bunch of gyms. The previous Pokemon game, Pokemon Sun and Moon, I actually personally was not a big fan of. There was a lot of things that I liked about it, but overall I just couldn't really get into it. One of the major contributing factors to that was the fact of the overzealous tutorial in the beginning really killed any mood and pacing that the game had in the beginning. I swear, it's at least 3 hours that you're spending in a tutorial before you actually start playing the game. And that made it really hard for me to get into the game. No matter how hard I tried, I just could not really get that far. And if I wanted to go back and replay it now, I'd have to replay that tutorial, which I really don't want to do. Pokemon Sword and Shield is much lighter on tutorials, and on top of that, lets you skip all of the existing ones. You no longer have to hear for the 10 millionth time about how a Pokemon Center works. This, on top of just the way everything is presented, reminded me of a lot of one of my favorite Pokemon games, Pokemon XD Gale of Darkness. Just the general aesthetic and overall presentation of the game really reminded me a lot of that game, so instantly it was catching my attention. On top of that, they had really likable and engaging characters. The rival is actually a really interesting take on the Pokemon rival. I won't say too much because it's best if you see it yourself. But let's just say that his character development throughout the game is pretty well done. It doesn't really do too much new, other than bringing everything to a modern standard on a modern console. But in terms of Pokemon mechanics, it's still the same old Pokemon. But to be honest, that's really all I wanted on the Switch, was just a fun Pokemon game to take on the go. And that's exactly what Pokemon Sword and Shield did. They delivered me a fun Pokemon game that is enjoyable all the way through, that I can take on the go anytime. Number 10 is a VR game called Stormland, and it's actually my favorite VR game right now. Stormland is an open-world RPG first-person shooter, and it's got a really good world and a really good story. The gunplay feels really fluid, and it's a lot of fun to shoot enemies and zip around. You have a lot of really good mobility in this game, and the overworld where you go from place to place reminds me a lot of Wind Waker. That is, if Wind Waker was entirely sand instead of water. It just feels really good, and it's like the first cohesive and fully complete VR game that I've played. Stormland came out before Boneworks, by the way. Stormland really does a great job with VR technology. It's a shame that it's Oculus only, but that's not really a big issue for me, since that's the only headset I have. The story and characters are really likable and engaging, and on top of that, the VR interaction that all of the game has set up is really immersive and really makes you feel like you're part of the game. One of the coolest things I think is that this is one of the few VR games I've seen that has proper inverse kinematics for your whole character. So when you look at yourself in a mirror, you can really see the movements that you're making. And it gives it a really cool sense of physicality. On top of that, it just has a lot of really cool moments that you wouldn't really think about being cool, except if they were in VR. For example, at the very beginning of the game, you start with a damaged body. You need to replace it. When you get to the terminal so that you can replace your arms, you have to physically grab your left arm and rip it off. And that feels so weird, and oh my god, it was the most uncomfortable thing I've experienced in VR. And it was pretty great. On top of that, the world is just really cool and interesting. The story takes a lot of cool twists and turns, and it'll keep you hooked for a long period of time. It's definitely my favorite VR game on the market right now, so if you have the Oculus Rift, definitely try it. If you don't have the Oculus Rift, you might be able to still get it working, but I'm not really sure how that stuff works. Number 9 on the list is Platinum's new Switch game, Astral Chain. Astral Chain is Platinum Games' new character action game. for the Nintendo Switch. It's got tons of different mechanics and styles coming from different Platinum games. It's a little bit of Nier Automata, a little bit of Metal Gear Rising, and a little bit of Bayonetta. It's got very RPG-like progression, similar to Nier Automata. The combo systems are very similar to Bayonetta games, and there's a lot of cool sword mechanics where you get to chop stuff in half, like in Metal Gear Rising. On top of that, it really does a good job at controlling two characters at once. It's how I imagine a JoJo game would feel if Platinum made it. In Astral Chain, you're physically chained to this alien that can do a lot of the primary damage that you'll be doing in your combos. It feels really good. One thing that was really weird though is that they actually don't give you your full moveset until about an hour in. It's actually very bizarre. You start with a very limited and wimpy moveset, which is really bizarre to me because it does not give a good first impression. I'm only mentioning this because I really want people to know you get a much more expansive moveset after the first hour of gameplay, and then it turns into one of my favorite Platinum games. I don't really understand why they went with this. You really have such a limited moveset early on. On top of all of this, Astral Chain is not just only a really good character action game, but in a weird twist and weird idea, it's also an amazing detective game. In Astral Chain, you play as a police officer, so often, when you need to find the bosses that you're going to be fighting, you have to physically look for clues and talk to witnesses to figure out the information to where you need to go. It's like a weird, bizarre mesh of Bayonetta and Ace Attorney. It's really interesting. It's not the most robust character action game, but it is pretty in-depth enough that it feels really satisfying. On top of all of the detective mechanics, it leads to a really interesting character action game. It's also just got a really cool looking presentation. It's got this really cool anime aesthetic, and it looks really nice, especially for the Switch. When I saw the game, I was worried that the game wouldn't hold a proper 60 on the Switch, but luckily that is not the case. It holds a proper 60 on the Switch, at least in docked mode. It's got a pretty good story, and the characters are pretty likable. On top of that, it also has a photo mode, and any game with a photo mode, I love. Die, monster! You don't belong in this world! Number 8 is a Kickstarter game that actually did the miraculous, and it delivered on everything it promised. Bloodstained Ritual of the Night is a Castlevania game through and through, and it's a really, really good one. I'd even say it's almost as good as Symphony of the Night. There isn't really a lot for me to say here, to be honest. It's a spiritual successor to Castlevania that succeeds in every possible way it could. It's got really good voice acting, really good gameplay, really good visuals, really good design, and just, in general, everything is just so polished, so amazing. It's just such a good Castlevania game. And it really is a Castlevania game. I don't really need to say much here. I would go on longer about why it's awesome, talking about how it's such a rewarding and enjoyable experience to trek through all the dungeons, how all of the crafting systems are all amazing, but really all I need to say is, if you like Castlevania, why haven't you picked up Bloodstained yet? It's amazing, it's so good, and it's the best Kickstarter game. Take notes, Mighty Number 9. If you want to pick up Bloodstained Ritual of the Night, you can pick it up on PC or Xbox Game Pass. It is also on Xbox One, PS4, and Switch. However, I would advise against getting the Nintendo Switch version. I'm not sure if it's been fixed yet, but that version launched with a lot of technical issues. So, stick to the PC, PS4, and Xbox One. Hey guys, you like pinball games? I do. Number 7 is a pinball game. I'm seeing a sort of theme here. My favorite game last year was a game called Yoku's Island Express, which was a pinball Metroidvania. I'm seeing a sort of theme. Whenever they release a pinball game, it gets my list. Pinball is good. Number 7 is a pinball game called Creature in the Well, which is a mix between pinball and hack and slash. It's a top-down hack and slash where you hit a ball around to hit different targets and different enemies. It's the most abstracted pinball game, but at its core, it is still pinball. It's got a very interesting story, and it's got some god-tier dialogue that really sent chills down my spine reading it. The story is about you trying to bring power back to all these settlements that are dying, but there's a creature in the well, as you can tell from the title, that is trying to stop you. And that creature, which talks to you throughout the whole game, is so interesting. They're a really unique and interesting antagonist that goes on that tells you throughout the game that you had your chance to save the world, and then you didn't take it. He talks about how he's the only thing that the people need now. And he's this really interesting character that really sends chills down your spine as you talk to him throughout the game. On top of that, it's just got such a beautiful presentation with this really nice desert aesthetic. The game itself is really fun and super challenging. Early on, it's not that bad. You just have to hit balls at stuff and then hope that they hit. But later on, you'll have to do some really, really, really intense pinball action. On top of that, you've got boss battles that are just so engaging, and they're a lot of fun. They're super tense and super exciting. Creature in the Well is such a great game, and the best way I could describe it is like if you mixed Hyper Light Drifter with pinball. And if that sounds like something up your alley, go check it out. You can pick up Creature in the Well on PC and Xbox. It's either on Steam or Xbox Game Pass. Number 6 is a game called Bug Fables, which is a game that's heavily inspired by the Paper Mario franchise. Paper Mario is drifting very far away from what it used to be. It is pretty much only focused on the paper aesthetic, and not at all on the RPG mechanics or all of the gameplay that made that game so good. Bug Fables does exactly what I've wanted for all these years, and provides a really proper and enjoyable Paper Mario-like experience. Its writing is super charming and whimsical. The characters are super enjoyable and funny. On top of that, the gameplay is more Paper Mario, but even more expanded upon than it was in Thousand Year Door. Instead of 2 party members at a time, you now have 3. Enemies now have weaknesses and resistances. You can now pass your turns to other party members. You can now get first strike and then get extra moves. There's so many new mechanics added, and all of that is added on top of the original Paper Mario mechanics. I need to play it more before I distinctly say this, but it's honestly maybe better than the original Paper Mario games, at least on a gameplay perspective. When you take the original mechanics from the game, recreate them, and then add even more mechanics on top of that, it usually turns out pretty well. It has pretty much all of the staples you could ask for from the Paper Mario games. You have the chapter-to-chapter structure, you have a town that has tons of little side activities, you have a bunch of things calling back to early Paper Mario games, such as a very similar system to the Trouble Center, where you can take on random requests that are like side quests. You have a cooking system, where you can mix different items together to get new items. All of this is just amazing. It's like everything I wanted from a Paper Mario game. But now, it's with cute bugs. And they really are adorable. I love them. They're so cute. Oh my god, I love them so much. They're so adorable. Oh my god. You can pick up Bug Fables on either PC, Mac, or Switch, and I highly recommend that you do so. That is, if this is your type of game. If it isn't, then, well, don't pick it up. Number 5 is Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is the best idea that I never knew I wanted. Star Wars Jedi Fallen Order is a pseudo-Metroidvania Souls-like game in the Star Wars universe. I had no idea I wanted that, but now that I have it, it's amazing. The game is part Dark Souls, part Metroid, and a little bit of Prince of Persia thrown in there too. It's got a really engaging story with really cool characters. The main character is really likable, and it calls back to a lot of the Star Wars expanded universe. There's so much that it does with the Star Wars franchise that the main movies aren't doing much of. On one hand, you have the gameplay, which you never knew is something that you wanted, and then on top of that, you have so much you have so much fan service for Star Wars fans that you never knew you wanted. Tell me if this sounds like a cool idea. A stormtrooper with a laser Gatling gun. Or how about stormtroopers that are specifically trained to fight Jedi? All of the bosses are really enjoyable. Early on, you get to fight an AT-AT. That's really cool. The game's presentation, since it's backed by EA, is so good and so high budget, and it's amazing. The first hour of the game are some of the best looking set pieces I've ever seen in a video game. And then later on, they just keep getting better and better. When you get onto Kashyyyk, you get dropped in this giant ocean, and you have to swim through an ocean, and well, there's tons of massive ATSTs in the background. And that would be a pretty cool set piece, but then it gets better. See, when I got there, I'm like, wow, that's really cool. That's really cool that they got those ATSTs working in the background. But then I kept swimming, realizing I was getting closer. I'm like, wait, I'm actually next to this. Wait, it has vines on it. wait, I need to Shadow of the Colossus my way up this ATSD, hijack it, and then pilot it to the base, and then shoot a bunch of guys in a turret section. And that is the coolest thing I've ever done in a video game in a long time. When I got into the cockpit of that ATST, I was like, dude, there's no way they're gonna let me pilot this, right? And then they did. Getting back to the main gameplay, however, it is very, very similar to Dark Souls, but it's a lot of fun. On top of that, if you're not really a big fan of super difficult games like Dark Souls, there is actually lower difficulties which allow you to focus on the story and set pieces. It's actually really cool. It's a very good way to make an accessible Dark Souls game that has easy difficulties. However, if you want the proper experience and you want that exhilarating rush of intense combat, you're going to want to play on the highest difficulty, Jedi Grandmaster. The boss fights in this game, when you're fighting another enemy with a lightsaber, are some of the best Souls-like gameplay I've ever played. They're so much fun. It's just intense back and forth battle. It's the first time I've seen a Star Wars game probably pull off a playable lightsaber battle. It really is quite amazing, and on top of all this, it's a miracle that this game came out in the way that it did, in that it's a game published by EA that has 0 microtransactions. 0. None. And the fact that they were able to do that was kind of amazing. Shoutouts to Respawn Entertainment. If you're interested, then you're going to want to pick it up. It's on PC, PS4, and Xbox One. Number 4 is Devil May Cry 5. Devil May Cry 5 is... Sorry, I got a bit distracted there. Devil May Cry 5 is one of the finest crafted character action games I've ever played. Devil May Cry 5 is an amazing Devil May Cry game that really bumps up the chaotic nature of Devil May Cry. Not only is it amazing in the gameplay department, but it's also just amazing in the presentation and story. All of the characters are exactly as you expect them to be. All of the characters have developed. All of the characters are the same characters you know. And pretty much anything that you wanted in a Devil May Cry game is now there. It's amazing. I love it. You go through the game as 3 characters. Nero, who has a customizable robot arm that has different effects based on which one you choose, on top of having most of his Devil May Cry 4 moveset. The new character V, which is a really interesting take on character action games, where you get to take a back seat while you send your minions to do the work. But on top of that, you have to get in close to finish them off, otherwise you won't actually get the kill. On top of that, you get to build meter by reading poetry. That's kind of his thing. He really likes to read poetry. And he's a lot of fun to play as a super silly and goofing around character, where you basically just drift around, throw a bunch of things at them, and then you're like, whoosh! Red 1 fish, 2 fish, red fish, blue fish, die! Mary had a little lamb. The little lamb was destroyed. Die! Random tangent, but there's also a mod where you can replace it with anime. So he reads anime as he fights. It's pretty good. And then you have Dante, who's well... Well, he's Dante. You don't really need much more than that. He's Dante. It's Dante turned up to 11, and Dante was already up to 11, so it's taking that and then turning it up to 11. Dante has the most expansive moveset he's ever had in the games. All of these are just a blast to play, and the entire game just feels so good and polished. It's got amazing characters, dialogue, cutscenes. It's got so much funny little tidbits that are just amazing. When you're playing as Dante, you get to dual-wield motorcycles. You also have Nero, where one of his arms, you can shoot it like a rocket, jump on it, and then ride it like a skateboard. You have one of his arms which you can shoot a giant laser from. One of his arms is a fork. You stab people with a fork. You know, just normal stuff. Dante also gets a cowboy hat. But it's not just stylish, it shoots lasers. This is the best game ever made. Devil May Cry 5 is probably some of the most fun I had with a game this year. It's so good, and you should really play it. It's easily the best action game this year. Number 3 is a little simple RPG Maker horror game known as LCL. You might think that this is a pretty weird game to put at number 3, all the way up here, above Devil May Cry 5, but trust me, this game is amazing. Of course, you have to be into RPG Maker horror games. If you're not, you're probably not going to enjoy it, but it is highly enjoyable if you are into those. LCL is this occult adventure game where you get to explore this mansion and a little bit of outside, trying to defend yourself from demons and ghosts. Half of it is set inside of a mansion, which takes most of it as a first-person puzzle game. And the other half is an RPG Maker adventure game. And it's got a really cool combat system. It seems pretty simple at first. When the enemies show up, you push the same color as their eyes. But trust me, it gets much more crazy as it goes on. LCL is a really mesmerizing trip all the way through. It's such an enjoyable and surreal experience. It's not very long, so you can get it done pretty quickly. It's roughly around 3 hours. The combat system was really enjoyable, especially with how varied it is over the course of the game. The game's advertised as this occult adventure game, which pretty much describes it pretty accurately, but it takes so many twists and turns and it's really fun and really engaging. It takes so many different tones throughout the whole game. There's so much to it going on. Some moments it's funny, some moments it's charming, some moments it's really cute, some moments it's really scary, some moments it's really chilling, and then some moments it's some like mind-melting anime stuff going on. LCL is such an enjoyable trip all the way through. I'm not mentioning too many specifics because of how short this game is, you really need to see for yourself. It is such an enjoyable and really chilling experience at times. It's such a great game. Sometimes it even gets really heartfelt and emotional. It might not seem that grand at first, but as it goes on, it becomes a really unforgettable experience. The game is a trip from beginning to end. It's highly recommended on my part. You can pick it up for PC or Mac on Steam. What the fuck? Number 2 is Hideo Kojima's new game, Death Stranding, which is the best game about delivering packages that I've ever played. That's right, delivering packages. It doesn't sound like a very intriguing concept for a game, but let me tell you, they really do a lot with it. Death Stranding is this weird, bizarre, mesmerizing, and surreal experience that really grips you from the very beginning of the game. The music that it has selected to play in some of the sections are really beautiful, and they really accentuate the gameplay a lot. As for the gameplay, you might think, well, how could they make delivering packages interesting? Well, let me tell you. Death Stranding is a game that does a lot of different things, but let me focus on package delivery first. A main majority of the game is actually delivering packages, where you just pick up a thing, walk from point A to point B, and then you deliver your package. You need to make sure it's in proper condition before you deliver it. If it's not in proper condition, then you'll fail the mission. But the way they make this interesting is all of the things that can go wrong in your journey. It's never just a simple path. Because of how variable the landscape is and how hostile the landscape is, it really makes you think about what you're doing. It's not that kind of thing that you just hold forward to go. You really need to think about how you're approaching the landscapes. Based on the elevation, based on all of the paths that you can take, based on all of the possible things that you could run into while you're delivering, it's never just as simple as walking towards there. Nothing ever just goes smoothly. Something always goes wrong. And that's the kind of thing that you have to manage. You need to make the best of bad scenarios. You need to plan your trips ahead of time, and then you need to be able to adapt your strategies when you realize that the trip that you were taking might not work. The story, as you would imagine from a Hideo Kojima game, is very interesting, and the cutscenes that they do for this are super cinematic, as you would imagine from a Hideo Kojima game. But what they do with these cutscenes is just so great and memorable. All of the characters are really likable, and the performances gave from these Hollywood actors are top-notch. In general, it's such a calming and interesting game. It never feels boring, but it never feels like too much is going on. It feels really unique. In an era where most games are violent and focused on just shooting people or fighting people, it's really nice to see a game where its primary focus is not on any of that, but on a landscape. And to see that in a AAA game is really refreshing. Of course, not to say that there isn't combat, there is. There is a lot of stealth sections when you need to infiltrate bases, where the game sort of feels like a Metal Gear game almost. And then there's parts when you get attacked by otherworldly beings, which then remind me a lot of Silent Hill. And then when you get captured by them, it suddenly turns into this frantic battle between you and this giant goop monster that is almost something akin to a Monster Hunter game. While these combat mechanics are here, they are very rarely the focus of the game. The most of the focus is on the environment, the story, all of the characters, and all of the environment, and all of the landscape that you'll be exploring. And they really did a really great job with its presentation and graphics. For example, when you're in the hub area where you get to choose your missions and stuff, there's so many little animations that Norman Reedus did in performance motion capture that make that hub world so much more interesting. Every now and then you'll turn the camera, he'll turn his head and then wink at you. You can zoom in on his crotch and then he'll get mad at you and then punch you in the face. You can go to a mirror and then make him make funny faces and then take pictures of him. All of these in a fully proper motion captured environment. It really adds a ton of life to this hub world, and it's one of the things that makes the game so enjoyable in my mind, is all of the little details they put. It's the kind of things that I think Hideo Kojima's games have always been amazing at, is tiny little details that you might not notice. There are some moments in this game where the music kicks in and you're just walking, when it just feels so relaxing and calming, and it gives me a sort of experience that I don't think I've ever felt in a video game. I think it's safe to say this is one of Hideo Kojima's new masterpieces. It definitely is not a game for everybody, but for the people that it is for, it's an unforgettable experience that you do not want to miss. You can pick it up on PS4, and later this year on PC. Death Stranding is a game that left a lot of impact on me, but I actually felt more impact from a certain other game, and that game is my number one spot. And it's not only a game that I felt a lot of impact from its story, not only a game that has amazing characters, not only a game that has amazing gameplay, but all of that with such an amazing presentation and such a crazy amount of replay value that I could be playing this game forever. That game, for our number one spot, is Fire Emblem Three Houses. Fire Emblem Three Houses is the newest installment in the Fire Emblem franchise, which is a strategy RPG where your units die permanently if they lose all their HP in combat. And when I say die permanently, I mean they're gone for the rest of the game. They die there. They actually die there. Yeah, they've also included a casual mode, which is perfect for people wanting to get into the game without having to deal with the horrible depression of losing your favorite character. But you really ought to try classic mode. It's some of the most engaging gameplay I've ever had in a video game, is knowing that one mistake could lead to the permanent death of one of my characters. And then crank the game up to hard mode, and you have some intense stuff to think about. You no longer can just think of your units as pawns or things to achieve the end goal. These are characters that you have spent over 50 hours with that now you are fighting a battle with. And if you don't want to lose your favorite characters, you need to do a lot of thinking and a lot of strategizing. It leads to some really crazy gameplay. Fire Emblem Three Houses takes this gameplay and it brings it up to a new level by expanding on the Fire Emblem formula. It's no longer just a go to point A, go to point B. It's no longer just go to this level, this level, this level. It no longer has that just simple strategy-based format. It now feels more like a Persona game, in that you have chapters at the end of a month that you can do. This is also the first Fire Emblem game where you're playing as a teacher, which means that you get to individually raise your units. It leads to some really engaging gameplay, and one of the major things that adds to its intense replay value is the ability to raise these units in any way you want. Early on you might do a pretty standard team, but on future playthroughs you can do some really crazy stuff, like maybe you can make your entire army made of healers. I don't know why you would do that, but you could. Or, if you want to do something stupid, you can make your entire army made of punching people. That way you just walk up to everybody and punch them in the face. This also leads into the intense amount of variation in the different routes. There are multiple routes, and 3 houses that you can choose from that all have their unique starting characters. You also have a completely different dynamic and story based on each house. Each house has a very unique approach to the main story, without actually changing too much. That is until you get to the second half of the game, where it greatly diverges and becomes 3 separate games, basically. Previous Fire Emblem games, I haven't felt that their stories were all that great. On top of that, their characters weren't all that interesting. There were a few characters here and there that were enjoyable, but most of them were not actually all that interesting. Fire Emblem 3 Houses has probably my favorite cast of characters, not only in Fire Emblem games, but some of my favorite characters in all of video games, actually. 3 Houses is definitely not only just my game of the year, but it is actually one of my new favorite video games. Each house's group has their own unique dynamic between all the characters, and each house leader has a very unique flavor to the routes that they take. The character dynamics and all of the character personalities are held together very well by the fact that this game did something that I don't actually see very often, which is full voice acting all the way through. And I mean full voice acting, not like, oh, the story important cutscenes are voice acted. I mean, every single time there's a line of dialogue, it is voice acted. I think that's pretty impressive, especially with the quality of voice acting that they display. It's honestly a real feat that they were able to pull it off. This game is really gripping. The character dynamics and all of that, all on top of all of the gameplay, makes it a game that really grips you all the way through and manages to make you play it multiple times. It also helps that on repeat playthroughs you have access to something called a New Game Plus, which makes future playthroughs a lot more smoothly and cuts out all of that early tutorial stuff. The game goes through a lot of stuff throughout the story. It goes so many places and has so many unique character stories, has so many unique main stories, and on top of all of that, has one of my favorite Fire Emblem chapters, period. Which I'm not going to talk about in this video because that would take away from it. The game's music and presentation are gorgeous. Its music is some of my new favorite music. All of the main themes and battle themes are just so enjoyable and a pleasure to listen to. Especially with the battle theme, but they have 2 unique variations that it swaps between based on what kind of state you are in battle. If it's in the normal strategy version, it'll play one version of the song, but if you're in a battle, then it'll play a different variation of the song. It's very cool and it seamlessly transitions between the 2. Its music is amazing, especially with the final boss theme. And when I say final boss themes, I mean, yes, there is different final bosses, each with their own unique theme, which further plays into each house leader having their own flair to the story. It's not the kind of game that you just choose one and then you've seen the game. It's the kind of game that you need to keep playing before you've seen everything in it. It's definitely going to give you a lot of content. It's easily my favorite game on the Switch right now, and easily one of my new favorite games. Those are my top 15 games this year. They're all very enjoyable in their own way, and I highly recommend you check out all of them. Thank you for sharing this journey with me as I went through these games. It was a really unique way for me to do videos. If these are popular, I'm definitely going to do more small snippet videos, maybe on just general thoughts on Twitter. And then I'll do longer videos on YouTube, which you can check out. If you want to show this video to your friends but don't want to send them this string of tweets, I'm going to upload the entire string throughout I'm going to upload the entire string as one video on YouTube. And with that, those are my favorite games. I'm interested to see what kind of games will grab my attention this year. I'll most likely do the same thing next year. Stay tuned.